Bobby, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good evening and welcome to all of you. This is Showtime's first Power Hour workshop, Engaging Your Virtual Audience. My name is Bobby O'Connell. I am your presenter tonight, and Trish Blackwelder is my co-host and Zoom master. So thank you, Trish. She will be managing the technical aspects tonight, or any difficulties or questions. And my other co-host tonight is Mary Lee Madison. And Mary Lee is a longtime professional speaker and trainer, and she's now retired like me. And Mary Lee will manage the chat window. So we encourage you to enter your thoughts into the chat or use the raise hand button in the participants window if you have a question. And let me just say that if there's one thing I know about adult learners, it's that all of us collectively, we all have the knowledge. So please do feel free to share. And again, please remain on mute unless you're called upon to speak. And that's so we can control any background noises. So I'd like to start out tonight with just a quick story. And this, many of you, or at least some of you, will probably recognize this. So it was the spring of 1993, and I was about to present my master's thesis. So I knew my material, but I was really, really nervous. And as the time got closer, I found myself getting warm. And then I got hotter and hotter and hotter until my face was beet red and I was dripping in sweat. And I actually thought that this was my first hot flash ever, except I was in my early 30s, so it was at least 20 years too early. And I know I got through it, but I don't remember much more about that night, except I do remember thinking afterwards how ironic it was that I had completed 18 years of formal education and I still could not give a speech. So a few days later, I'm chatting with a coworker named Bill, and I happened to ask him why he had all these ribbons hanging in his cube. That's when I found out about Toastmasters. So I convinced another coworker to go with me to a meeting on Wednesday, and then the following week, Lisa and I both joined the club. That was over 25 years ago. And my life has been forever changed for the better. I still have a lot to learn, but I've come such a long, long way since that first meeting. And over the years, I eventually became a better speaker and maybe even more so an evaluator. And over that 25 plus years, I've literally been studying the art of public speaking as well as the business of professional speaking. So tonight, I would like to share with you some of the things I've learned about being an engaging presenter. And in particular tonight, we'll talk about how to be an engaging presenter in a virtual environment. So let me go ahead and share my screen. For me, audience engagement really comes down to just two things: compelling content and impactful delivery. And this is true whether you're speaking in person or in a virtual environment. And this will be our baseline for the conversation tonight. So I'll speak briefly about the components of compelling content and impactful delivery. Then we'll talk about three distinctions where speaking to a virtual audience and engaging with a virtual audience is really, really different compared to speaking to an in-person audience. And then finally, we're going to take a quick look at the top 3 winning speeches from the Toastmasters International World Championship of Public Speaking that was held last month. So how can you create compelling content? For me, it begins by having a message that has value for your audience. There's got to be a WIFM, a what's in it for me. And then I think you need great stories that support your major points. And they have to be organized in a way that makes sense with, a strong, interesting opening and smooth transitions, and then a call to action in the end. And of course, there's lots of other things you can do to craft a compelling speech. I'm talking about having short sentences, powerful words, active verbs. You'll want to have an engaging and intriguing title. You can use humor, imagery, triplets, data and statistics, anaphras, analogies, alliteration, or throw in dialogue and quotes. There's so many things you can do to make your words more interesting and help to get your message across. And what do we mean by impactful delivery? So now we're talking about things like body language, your smile, your facial expressions, your eye contact, how you use the stage, and just the energy and choreography of your gestures and your movements. And of course, there's vocal variety, changing the rate of speech or your pitch or your volume, using dialogue and changing voices for the characters in your stories. And finally, the use of pauses to give your audience a moment to absorb your thoughts. And finally, I think there are other ways that you can make your delivery unique and memorable. You can use visual aids or props, or do something unexpected and surprising to create a really wow moment, or whatever else you can think of that will generate energy and emotion and create a multi-sensory experience for your audience. So again, this is our baseline for the discussion tonight, and whether in person or speaking to a virtual audience. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment now. And I'd just like to see if you'd give me a thumbs up if you agree that the beginning of audience engagement comes down to content and delivery. Who's with me on this? Okay, good, thank you. I'd also like to find out a little bit more about who's in the audience tonight. So please raise your hand if you are a Toastmaster and you want to make your online presentations better. That looks like all of us. And how many of you are Toastmasters who are considering competing in the online contest this year? Raise your hand. Okay, see a couple of hands. And then who of you are trainers or facilitators, or maybe you want to be a trainer or facilitator, perhaps at TLI, and you need ideas for how you can engage your online participants? If you'd raise your hand. Okay, a few more. So we'll talk about these things as we go through the session tonight. And regardless of why you're here tonight, I do think that because of COVID-19, things have been really different for us as speakers, and I think it's going to be that way at least in the near future. Our club meetings are online, people are telecommuting, so work meetings are happening online, training and conferences are happening online. It's like everything is virtual. And I really believe this is going to continue after COVID. I think we'll be living in a hybrid world, and that's going to be our new normal. So let me go ahead and bring up my slides again. This is what our new normal as presenters basically looks like. So what are those three distinctions for engaging with a virtual audience? I believe that we're talking about eye contact, energy, and experiences. So let's talk about eye contact for a minute. As in-person presenters, we train ourselves to scan the audience, and then we find one person to look at, we hold their gaze for a moment, then we move on to another part of the audience and we find someone else to look at. That just doesn't work with an online audience. So we need a new skill, and that new skill is to be able to look directly at the camera. And if we can master that skill, everyone in our virtual audience will feel like we're talking directly to them. In fact, there's a local professional speaker and former Toastmaster who I think some of you probably know. His name is Joel Weldon. And Joel says that we should actually train ourselves to look through the camera at our virtual audience. So what does that look like or not look like? I thought I'd pull some examples from the educational presenters at the International Convention. So first is Dawn Frail. And Dawn did an educational session called the 8-Carat Communicator. And she just had exceptional eye contact, maybe even just a little too much. She stayed seated in one position throughout her whole presentation. And she did break eye contact a few times for a particular gesture. But again, she had really exceptional eye contact. Another presenter was Richard Harden, and he did a session called Move Them Without Seeing Them. And Richard stood up for his presentation. He had great energy and fantastic vocal variety. And he spoke about looking directly at the camera, but I think this is a skill he's still working on because I thought he looked at his notes quite a bit of the time. And probably my favorite educational session was done by Simon Bucknall. And his session was called The Art of the Elevator Pitch. And Simon had excellent eye contact. He used gestures. And even though he was seated, he moved around a bit, you know, from side to side or back and into the camera. For me, he was just very conversational and so engaging as a virtual presenter. And even though we know eye contact is so important as virtual presenters, there are times when we need to break eye contact. And that's okay, because we may have a story or a gesture where we need to move around a little bit, or we need to deal with the technology, sharing our screen or checking the chat window, or asking, you know, if we ask participants to raise their hand, we may need to look around and see how people have responded. And the thing is, most of the time, you should have direct eye contact with the camera. And here we see Darren LaCroix. He's the 2001 World Champion of Public Speaking, and he does a great job of eye contact with the camera in his Stage Time University videos. And as a speaker, there's times when we also need to use some notes. So how do you manage that without being too distracting for a virtual audience? A lot of people have two screens. One side they have their Zoom and the other side they have their notes. Now for me, I happen to have one very large monitor, so I do pretty much the same thing. Zoom on one side, I have my document up maybe on the other. And if I have notes, I have them in very large font, at least 18 point. And then I try to have the document as close to the camera lens as possible so that my eyes don't have very far to move to check my notes. And I've heard of one speaker who uses a typing stand or, you know, document holder to put her notes on so she can refer to them quickly if she needs to. If I'm using PowerPoint, I usually will print out my notes again with a very large font, and hopefully I'm only using bullet points. And then again, I hold them close to the camera without blocking the lens, and that seems to work for me most of the time. I also heard recently that there's something you can do in Zoom where you can do a partial screen share of your PowerPoint. And I haven't researched this yet, but if someone knows how to do that, maybe you could share at the end of the session tonight. I'd be really interested to hear. And then hopefully you've practiced your presentation enough times that you've virtually memorized your notes and you won't need notes at all. And as we learn to master the art of eye contact with the camera.
After I left,
So after you left.
Yeah, they weren't well, because.
Can we please get them people muted? Okay. So as you're working on improving your eye contact with the camera, some people like to use a smiley face or a photo of a pair of eyes. And they put it right around their camera as a reminder to look directly at the camera. And if you think about it, it's psychologically harder to look away or to multitask, let's say, if someone is looking directly at you, even online. So do you see why it's so important to have great eye contact with the camera as a virtual presenter? And in my opinion, if you can only master one online presentation skill, then I think eye contact with the camera is the one you should be working on. So let's check in with Mary Lee now. Have there been any comments or questions come up in the chat? Mary Lee, if you'll unmute, please.
So far, Bobby, we haven't had any questions or comments, but I have one. I've been looking over where the speakers or where the participants have come from, and so far we have 12 different clubs represented, and we have 3 from out of the Phoenix Valley, Tucson, Prescott Valley, and Vallejo, California. So whoever did the marketing for this has been reaching a lot of people. So just to remind everyone, we'll be breaking periodically to answer questions or to answer comments or observations you might have. So please just write down your thoughts. We'll get back with you.
Okay, thank you, Mary Lee.
Mark, bye.
All right. So let's move on to our second distinction tonight, and that's about energy. With an in-person audience, we can see how people are reacting. We get a feel for what's going on with our audience. But with an online audience, we can't hear the laughter. We can't see the body language. And we really can't, feel or sense the energy that's in the room or even gauge people's reactions. And for me, this is a huge distinction. The first time I gave an online presentation, it was disconcerting not to be able to see the people I was speaking to. And once again, I think it comes down to new skills, or at least we need to adapt and expand on our existing skills. And the key is to understand that you and only you are responsible for bringing energy to the online presentation. So professional speaker Ty Boyd, he says that high energy is critical for engaging a virtual audience in order to keep people's attention through the entire presentation. He also says that high energy is actually the greatest asset that any public speaker can have. So what do you do to create that energy? I think it's a lot of the same things we do for an in-person presentation. And let's start with passion. You need to be passionate about your topic, because if you don't really care, then why would your audience care? And we see here Tony Robbins, and for me, he is the quintessential passionate, high energy public speaker. I think we also need to psych ourselves up in advance of a presentation. So maybe stand in your best power pose, or give yourself the "I've got this" look in the mirror, or a little pep talk, or channel your inner voice. For me, I like to use the words, "Oh, yes, I can," before I present. And Mary Lee, I know you have some other words you like to use. Could you unmute and share with us real quick?
Yes. As I'm driving to the venue where I'm making my presentation, I'm talking to my steering wheel, probably like a lot of the rest of you do. And what I'm saying is, I got it, they want it, I got it, they want it, I got it, they want it. And by the time I get out of my car, I'm all set to go.
Okay. Well, so let's go ahead and practice that for a minute. Let's practice channeling our inner voice. And if you want to, go ahead and stand up and strike a power pose, and then repeat the words 3 times with me. "Oh, yes, I can." So 3 times. Are you ready? Oh, yes, I can. Oh, yes, I can. Oh, yes, I can. So do you feel that? And studies have shown that if you do these kinds of exercises repeatedly, it does change the way you feel, and it boosts your energy and your enthusiasm for your confidence to be a presenter. Your voice can also help to create energy. And I think warmth and sincerity and enthusiasm really do come through to a virtual audience. Or shake up your audience with a volume change. And if you're like me and you sometimes speak too quickly, then it's a good idea to work on practicing a little slower rate of speech. And that may even help with buffering issues. And I think gestures can make a difference to the audience energy or their, the reactions of an audience. So here the distinction is that the stage we have to work with is much smaller than we might have in a virtual venue. We also need to make sure that our gestures work within that frame of our online box. And I suggest that you avoid fast gestures because they tend to be blurry in front of the camera. And then also be very purposeful if you're planning to do a gesture that goes close to the camera. So you might also use visual aids to impact your audience. Maybe something cute or funny. Or something that generates an emotional response. And science does tell us that ideas and concepts that are presented with pictures are much more impactful and engaging for an audience, and they're remembered longer than just your words. And if you want to capture or maybe recapture your audience's attention, then I suggest you do something shocking and unexpected. Whoops. I really loved it when Jim Eng used the clapper at the Awesome August event. He also had pom-poms, which added energy and just made it kind of fun. So let's take a break again and check in with Mary Lee. Has anyone added ideas in the chat for how to create energy during an online presentation? Please unmute, Mary Lee. Mary Lee, can you?
I was clicking. I'm working at it. Okay. This says, Bobby is awesome. I'm really enjoying her presentation. So that's the kind of feedback we love. Here's another observation. When I presented my most recent speech, I stood up and practiced my gestures with Zoom to see what my audience would see and to know where the edges of the camera view were. So I was not gesturing outside the frame. What a great idea.
Yes, we'll actually talk about that a little later when we watch the international speeches.
Good.
We won't be watching the videos, but we'll talk about them a bit in a little while here.
Here's another comment.
Okay.
I have a bad habit. Confession is good for the soul. I have a bad habit. I want to see the faces in the gallery to help with my energy. I have tried to keep looking at the camera, but I still go back to looking at the faces. What else can I do? That's a good question.
Well, I think that suggestion about using the smiley face or the photo of some eyes around your camera, I think that's really helpful to really remind you to look at the camera. And it is hard to do because we all want that feedback that we would normally get from an in-person audience, and it's just not possible online.
And I'll share with you my sticker. It's a little sticker of a hummingbird right next to the camera. So I'm looking at that hummingbird as I look right at the camera. So you'll find what works best for you. Bobby, I have a couple of more comments here. They're really rolling in.
Mary Lee, I think your sticker has covered up your camera.
Oh,
So that's something to watch out for. You want to make sure not to
there it
cover
is.
the
Okay.
lens.
Better. Okay. All right. Thank you. Another comment. Move the audience closer to the camera. Wait a minute. Lost this now. Hold on. Move the audience closer to the camera, if possible, to see them better. So that's one suggestion. Another is a comment. Thank you for providing tips on better presentations through Zoom. What tips would you advise audience participants to have to be better Zoom audience members? That's a good question. Another one, I'm afraid if I stand up and away from the computer, my voice won't sound clear and loud enough. Do I need some kind of a microphone? And you may. I'm a little hard of hearing, so I have purchased speakers that help me out. They're no bigger than billiard balls, and they really help me. So again, it's finding what works for you. Another one, I have a hard time, and when it is a very powerful speech and the audience tears up and I look away. So I do not cry or get too emotional to continue. So that's another one about handling emotions while speaking. So Bobby, I think these questions and comments are really indicative of what you're talking about. People are really getting the idea that in order to have a good virtual speech, you need all the same elements that are in a good physical speech, only bigger, better, higher, faster, more exaggerated. So I think that your point is coming across. I think your people are really communicating with you. Thank you so much. We'll keep going. Bobby?
Thank you, Mary Lee. And one of the comments I'd like to touch on,
Yes.
a presenter at TLI spoke about standing away from the camera. She was standing in her kitchen and she thought that she needed to speak louder so that people would be able to hear her since she was further from the microphone. Well, it turned out her microphone self-adjusted. So the very first session, apparently people thought she was kind of yelling at the camera. So what you can do then is practice in advance and record yourself on a Zoom session to see how the volume changes when you're close to the camera or if you're standing back, as you'd probably do for an international speech or a speech competition. But let's go ahead and move on now to our third distinction for how engaging with a virtual audience is very different from engaging with an in-person audience. And that has to do with experiences. And by that, I mean the experiences, the interactivity that people have with you as the speaker, and then also the interactive experiences that participants might have with each other in a facilitating or training situation. And fortunately, technologies like Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting, they all have functionality built in to help with this. So you can use the chat to post comments or upload a file. You can use the thumbs up, thumbs down reaction buttons or the raise hand button. And of course, you can do those last things either physically as well as electronically. And then there are things that speakers can do to create interaction. You can set up a poll, like this is an opinion poll, like sometimes you might want to do. Or you could set up a poll that has people self-assess their skill level, maybe before or even after your presentation. Or you might want to set up a quiz to make sure that participants are actually getting what you're talking about. And then we have the breakout rooms. And this is the equivalent of pair sharing with a neighbor, or breaking into a small group for a discussion like you would have in an in-person session. And I think the breakout rooms were actually very popular during the nuts and bolts sessions for TLI this summer. And of course, there's other tools you can use like whiteboards and annotation to capture participant feedback. So neuroscience tells us that interactive experiences are critical to audience engagement. And again, this is whether in person or when you're speaking to a virtual audience. And we humans can only focus our attention for a few minutes at a time. And that's because listening is actually a very physically challenging and demanding activity. And your audience will lose energy if you can't keep them engaged. So Carmen Gallo says that if you're going to be speaking for more than 5 to 7 minutes, he says it's a good idea to chunk your material into sections, and then in between those sections to use what he calls soft breaks. And Gallo is the author of Talk Like TED and some other books too. And what he means by a soft break is maybe to tell a story or show a video or do a demonstration or maybe have another speaker talk for a while. All of these things help give your participants or your audience, it gives their mind a rest from that hard work of listening. And then we as facilitators and trainers and speakers, we really need to figure out new ways to engage our audience online. So it might mean coming up with brand new ideas for activities, or maybe you can take an activity that you've done in person and then change it up so that it works in the online environment. So for example, maybe you can, as an icebreaker, you could have people, give them 1 or 2 minutes to draw a picture of their hobby. No words, just a picture. And then afterwards have everyone hold up their picture in front of the camera and maybe call on 1 or 2 people, or put them into breakout rooms and have them share with, you know, 1 other person or maybe a small group. And so, oh, sorry, I missed one part. Recently on the Toastmasters International website, someone posted a rule of thumb. And what they said was that with an online audience, to engage your virtual audience, you should try and have people talk, touch, or do something every 3 to 5 minutes. And again, use that interactive activity like that icebreaker. That would be my picture if we did that activity. And I know I'm not an artist, but hopefully you can figure out that I actually like genealogy. So another idea would be to have what they call a family portrait, a screenshot. And then to keep it fun for a work meeting or your club meeting, have people make, you know, funny faces or wear crazy hats or bring your pet, or everyone do the heart gesture when you take your portrait. And here's a Toastmasters club where everyone was wearing a Pathways shirt. Another idea is to play a quick game of Would You Rather. So you could have people hold up 1 finger if they prefer one option, or 2 fingers if they would rather do a second option. Now I have my slides up, so this time that's not going to work. I'll go ahead and ask you instead to type in a 1 into the chat if you would like to speak all languages, or type a 2 into the chat if you would rather be able to speak with animals. So take a moment to do that. And again, a 1 if you'd like to speak all languages, or a 2 if you'd rather be able to speak to animals. So Mary Lee, what's the consensus? You'll need to unmute.
So far, I have 6 people indicating, number 2, that they'd rather speak with animals. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 indicating that they would rather speak to all languages. So that's about a toss-up, and more are coming in. So that was a quick response.
Great, well, thank you.
Thank you. Back to you.
Because a virtual presentation is sedentary, A short physical break can be priceless. You might be able to lead a little stretch exercise for a minute or so, or ask people to stand up and jump a couple of times. It's amazing how much difference that small physical break will make in people's ability to, they get recharged and then they can focus on the task again. And I'm going to stop my share right now because I found this game called Wheel of Names and I really want to share it with you. So I'm going to bring up a different screen. Okay, so you may notice that you'll find your name on this wheel. These are the people who registered for the session tonight. You can also add an image to the spokes of the wheel, or in this case, I added the Toastmasters International logo in the middle. So let's go ahead and give it a spin. Okay. Garrett, you are our winner, and I'm sorry I don't have money, but I will send you a Lucky Duck certificate by email after this session. And I'm going to go ahead and remove Garrett's name so he doesn't win a second time. And I'd like to just show you how you can change up the sounds, and there's some other options as well. So we'll make it dramatic music, and afterwards we'll go for the fanfare. And we'll go ahead and spin again. Okay, Jessica, again, no money, but we will send you a Lucky Duck certificate after the session. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and stop share for a minute. And, there are so many ways that we can come up with ideas for engaging the virtual audience. It's just up to you to be creative. So Mary Lee, have there been any ideas posted in the chat for how we can, keep these interactive experiences happening with a virtual audience? And which, if you'd unmute, please.
We're having a lot of traffic over here. This is good. This is a question or a comment left over from the last question you asked. True confessions, I have a bad habit of tapping on my desk. I'm trying to eliminate this. And so if you have ideas for that, Bobby, perhaps that would be great to answer. Also, some suggestions. If you are standing up, you will project better, which helps with the volume concern. And then we have a response to that, directly to that suggestion. A lady stood up in one of my meetings and we all got to see her PJ bottoms. So be careful when you do that. And so another important tip is to pay attention to your lighting. Ideally, the light source would be behind your computer, which puts it in front of you. Too many people are backlit or top lit, and they are dark or half shaded. These are great comments. And then this comment, Colleen, I'll bet that lady that stood up and showed her PJs got the attention back on the meeting. So that was very cute. And then we have another question for you, Bobby. You can answer this. When you have a long training session, should you have a 10-minute break every hour or 15-minute break? Another one, where is this? I would like to find it. And woohoo! Not sure. You'll have to tell me what the woohoo is about. Oh, I know. They are talking about the wheel. They want to know where they can get the wheel. Woohoo!
So let me just interrupt real quickly. And Trish, would you go ahead and upload the handout to the chat window? And in that handout, you'll find the link to the Wheel of Names game. And there are a bunch of other links and ideas for, things you can do to engage with an online audience. And as far as stopping tapping of your fingers on your desk, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. I'll tell you a weird story. When I was a kid and I was trying to teach myself to play piano, if my finger made a mistake and hit a wrong note, I would literally, and this is weird, I would bite on my finger so that it wouldn't make the same mistake again. Now, I'm not sure if that will work for you, but maybe some kind of behavior modification, or maybe have a partner who could tell you, kind of like the ah bell, ding you anytime they hear you tapping, maybe send you a chat message. So let's go ahead and move on though. And and sorry, there was also a question about having a long training session and should you take a break every hour or so. I'm going to say yes. And that's what, Caitlin Ewens was the TLI chair this year. And we had an online TLI for the first time ever. And between each 1 hour session, there was a 10-minute break. And I think that was, that was critical. That was really important to have that break. Again, because online presentations are sedentary normally. So people need that break to recharge and then be able to focus when they come back to the session. So let me share my screen again and we will move on because I would like to talk about the International Speech Competition. And obviously we don't have time to watch the videos of all 3 speeches, but these are our top 3 winners from the championship that was just held last month. The videos are available online at the Toastmasters International website, I understand at least until December 31st. So if you haven't had a chance to go look at them, I urge you to do so. And there's a link for those presentations in the resource handout. So what I did instead of watching videos was I took a few clips from each presentation. So just to give you an idea of how these presenters engaged their virtual audience. So we'll start with Lindy McLean. And she did a speech titled Your Buried Story. And it was about how you deal with regrets. And in her case, it was not staying in contact with her host family from Peru. So she did a lot of things really well. And for example, right after she acknowledged the contest chair, she leaned into the camera and did like an audience aside. And she told us that our buried story is the one that we never tell people because we're afraid that they'll find out the truth and they'll think less of us. And she used that audience aside technique several times in her presentation. And Lindy did a really great job also of using dialogue and characters in her stories. She moved her body to represent different characters. She changed her voice for the sound of different characters. She also used the anchoring technique. In the middle row of screenshots, you can see how at one point she spoke from the left side of the screen, another point she was on the right, and then most of the time she was actually in the middle. And what I loved most about Lindy's presentation was her use of gestures. They were just choreographed beautifully to match her words. And she was so expressive, it was like watching her dance. And I think maybe even her semifinal speech was even more so, just very engaging. And in second place was Linda Marie Miller. And Linda Marie's speech was titled, Pretending Not to Know. And it was about racism and white privilege. She also did a lot of great things. And in particular, her use of props was fabulous. She used them as reveal moments throughout her presentation. So at one point, she made a comment that she's, comforted by the fact that she has never discriminated in her life. And then she gave several examples, and each time she silently held up a card that contradicted her words. So for example, she said, I've never told a racist joke. And she silently held up the card that said, I stayed silent when other people did. And at the end, she said, go ahead, ask yourself. And she silently held up the card that said, "What are you pretending not to know?" I just thought that was so, so powerful. And Linda Marie did many other things well in addition. So look at her background. It's very engaging and warm. The lighting is fabulous. She's wearing a jacket that looks very professional, and notice how the color contrasts well with the background. It kept her the center and the focus of attention throughout her speech. So what I loved about Linda Marie's presentation was her use of props, her powerful, timely message, and then she also had a great call to action. At the end, she said the words, and you could tell she was getting choked up when she said, "And I will be silent no more," which that brought tears to my eyes. And that's something I look for in every winning speech. Make me laugh and make me cry within 5 to 7 minutes. And of course, the winner of the International Speech Contest this year was Mike Carr. And his speech was titled "The Librarian and Mrs. Montgomery," and his message was that the victory is in the try. And if you look at that top row of screenshots, he did all of those things at the beginning of his speech. So he started out positioned in the bottom left corner of his screen. And then a few seconds later, he did this gesture like he was pulling on a heavy door. And notice how it's positioned perfectly for that effect within the box of the camera frame. And then a few seconds after that, he leans in toward the camera at this extremely odd angle. And Mike used his space really well. He backed up and he moved around, and he was such an animated storyteller. His facial expressions and his gestures just really contributed to his virtual presentation. So again, what I loved about Mike's speech was his animation, his gestures, his use of the space, and especially those unusual camera angles. It was so surprising. So again, if you haven't had a chance to watch these speeches, go online and do so. I think you'll be very interested to see how these people engaged their audience in an online venue. And I have to say, I was really proud of myself because I actually picked the top 3 winners, but I admit I had them in the wrong order. So let me go ahead and stop share, because I'd really like to hear what people think about the winning speeches from the international competition.
Okay, I have one person who has a suggestion to the speaker who is having trouble tapping his hands, and it says sit on your hands. So that's a good way to do it. More comments about the Zoom or about the wheel, and so far that is it. Now I have someone waiting in the waiting room, and is that something Trish you could help with? I can't get that person in.
I'm taking care of the waiting room. Don't worry about that.
Okay, all right. So Bobby, that it looks like people I think are so engaged they haven't had a chance to respond.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary Lee. And we'll go ahead and recap now what we've talked about tonight. So first, we agreed that the baseline for audience engagement really has to do with compelling content that's delivered with impact. And then we talked about the 3 distinctions, the ways that engaging a virtual audience is much, much different than engaging an in-person audience. And that's with the direct eye contact. Are you looking at the camera? And we talked about energy. You have to be the one to bring the energy to an online presentation. And finally, we talked about experiences and how you'll have to come up with some new ideas to get that engagement with your audience. And again, every 3 to 5 minutes is the recommendation. And so here's my call to action for you tonight. If you really want to be better as an online presenter and engaging your audience, it really comes down to practice, practice, practice. So get that Zoom account, they're free. And you can record yourself and then review. Are you looking at the camera? Do your gestures work well within the frame of your online box? And someone mentioned that in the chat. And what about your notes? If you need notes, are you using them in a way that's not distracting for your virtual audience? And then finally, just assess yourself. Is your session interactive? Is there enough energy? And if you do all of these things, I really believe you'll become a much more engaging presenter with a virtual audience. And if you'd like to have a place where you can practice those skills, then I invite you to join us at Showtime. We meet the second and fourth Mondays of the month at 6:30, and our focus now is on high quality evaluations, and we're working to master the virtual presentation skills. We're also a 100% online club now, and it's an advanced club. We'll also be continuing with the Power Hour series. And in 2 weeks, we'll have Nancy Starr Cassidy as our presenter. And this is Monday, October 5th at 6:30 p.m. And her topic will be in virtual interviewing skills. So I invite you to join us all for that as well. And now I guess we've got a few minutes left. So are there any other questions or comments from the audience here?
Bobby. Yes, Bobby, I have a couple. This is a question from Ryan. The use of depth seems to be a change from traditional speaking, a new dimension to look forward to when presenting online. And Nikki says, yes, Ryan, that's a good point. And Trish says, Ryan, the world champion Randy Harvey introduced speaking in 3D over a decade ago. It really comes into play in virtual space. For more information about Showtime Toastmasters, visit this link. And someone says, Ryan says, thank you, Trish. And Angel says, with many people working from home, utilizing the internet for many other resources such as shopping and paying bills, when is too much screen time a problem?
That's a really good one. And, and I think that's an individual concern. There's a lot of talk about mental health issues these days. And again, we need those physical breaks from our online life. I mean, it's so important to stay physically active and again, take those breaks.
One more question, another tip. Also pay attention to your camera angles. Ideally, it would be the eye level, not looking up at you, just as you had said before. So I think everyone's comments, Bobby, have been right on the mark today.
Well, thank you then. That's really what we have for you here tonight. I hope you're all leaving with some ideas that you can implement immediately in your very next online presentation. And we can go ahead and keep the session open for a few more minutes if you'd like to stay and chat. And otherwise, have a good evening. And I can't wait to see your next sensational online presentation. Bye all.